Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 47, The Wanted Unwanted. We'll start off with some Star Trek news, and then we'll talk about Season 1, Episode 3 of Star Trek Prodigy, Starstruck.
Then we'll get into our audience question right after our main topic, The Wanted Unwanted. We're going to talk about the characters known as the Unwanted in Prodigy, and how sometimes we can also feel unwanted in our lives, and how wanted we really are. It's going to be an interesting conversation. Stick around. Well, Mike, it doesn't feel like it's been 3 episodes of Prodigy yet.
I know. Well, those first two smushed together into a big premiere event. But yes, we are already into episode 3. So things are picking up steam fast.
Yeah, which is weird. And I want to refresh your memory about our 800 episode, Star Trek at 800.
Yes, I do remember.
I had done this deep dive into how you had to enumerate everything to arrive at 800 episodes. And the way you did it was all of these premieres that were double length were considered single episodes, even though they were later aired as 2 episodes in syndication.
Right.
So now Prodigy has gone and flipped that upside down, and their premiere, which aired as one and is on Paramount Plus as 1 episode, is being counted as 2.
Yeah.
Exactly the opposite from every other premiere in Star Trek history.
I guess that's because when it goes over to Nickelodeon, it'll be 2 episodes.
I think so. But I don't know why that should have primacy over. Oh, well. Hey,
no smack on Nickelodeon. I should dump green slime on your head for that.
I don't. I'm not saying anything bad about Nickelodeon. It's nothing against Nickelodeon. I still fear having water dumped on my head every time I say I don't know. So, oh no!
Oh man, I'm loath to admit how much I enjoyed that show as a middle schooler.
Oh, I'm not loath at all. I loved it, man. You can't do that on television, kids. That's the show that we're referring. For those of you who maybe
good stuff.
Well, Mike, it's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful evening, but I hear you have some Star Trek news.
I do. Speaking of Star Trek Prodigy, we're going to have a longer season than we thought. We're going to get 20 episodes instead of 10. There's going to be a mid-season break we didn't think was coming. It'll start, Thursday, November 18th will be episode 5 of Prodigy and episode 1 of season 4 Star Trek Discovery.
Ah, okay.
And Prodigy has been renewed for a 2nd season already. So they are all thrusters go on Star Trek Prodigy.
Well, this amazed the heck out of me because, last week we were talking about the potential for a Prodigy-based film.
Yeah.
One of the possible ways that an animated Star Trek film would be done. And now here we're seeing Star Trek Prodigy having 20 episodes, the most episodes of any Star Trek season since season 4 of Enterprise.
Yeah. So wasn't it David wishing for longer seasons just a few weeks ago? He's got his wish.
Yeah, he's got his wish for sure. But what's interesting is we were planning on the show that we would have 7 weeks of Prodigy and Discovery airing on the same night, and we'd have to cover 2 episodes every episode. So looks like we're only going to have 1 of those, which is helpful in terms of having main topics and being able
grace
to do other
from Paramount. Grace from the peak of Paramount Plus.
The mountain of entertainment, as we love to call attention to. Yes. So it's interesting. It kind of freaks me out. I didn't expect that much Prodigy. That's twice as much Prodigy as we were expecting. And I've got to say, my enthusiasm for Discovery 4 has been so strong that I've been like, I love Prodigy, but let's get it done so I can get to Disco. Because I'm just like, I've got to get my Disco. And I miss it so much. And every time I see like an image or something, I'm looking at a picture of Michael Burnham right now, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh, Captain, my Captain, but it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. And of course, we've talked about Robert Beltran returning as well as Chakotay, so that'll be interesting too. I don't know if it's going to be actually him or a hologram or what it's going to be. So,
speaking of that 800 episode,
yeah,
I think I have to concede that you are correct and that Short Treks is considered its own series, because I've been paying attention to that recently after that episode, after our discussion, and it does seem that they count Short Treks as its own thing. So
fascinating, because that was another one of those weird things that we had wondered about. So that actually means that Prodigy is the 10th Star Trek series, and Strange New Worlds will be the 11th.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, I see, but I don't know. It's really weird because, like, as a production, though, Short Treks, doesn't have one showrunner, it doesn't have one writing team, it doesn't have one cast, one crew, anything like that. It's bits from other series, honestly, in terms of the production. So that's interesting. But yeah, I see how this is. They're just messing with everything, and it's impossible to keep track of anything now.
Well, it's just like the canon of scripture, right? Different communities have different orderings of books and different numbers of books, and so it's all washed. It's all canon. It's all canon.
It's all canon.
And I ran across something very interesting in somebody else's blog recently, or maybe it was Christopher Bennett, the Star Trek novelist. He was reminding people that we fans use the term canon to mean true, in a sense, and so everything has to conform to canon. But he reminded me that canon came over from the world of biblical scholarship, and the books in the Bible don't all line up in every detail, but they're all canon. So he says canon is what you have to work with. It's not so. That's a tangent. You could probably just cut that.
That's fascinating. No, that's fascinating. It's good to remember. It's good to remember.
It was helpful, I thought. Yes.
Yeah. That's cool.
Good reminder.
That's cool. So, the piece of news that we failed to mention last week, because we had 4 pieces of news. The thing that we failed to mention last week, and we're going to go ahead and mention it just in case people don't know, all of Star Trek is now available on Paramount Plus. What are we, 3 years into this thing?
Yeah.
Nearly 4. And we finally have all of Star Trek on Paramount Plus. It's about to, well, I say that since CBS All Access. I don't know how long it's been since they merged back together.
I think they became Paramount Plus this past January.
Oh, well, all right.
That's where the Mountain of Entertainment joke came from, because that was in all the ads around the Super Bowl. So February, right. February.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. I therefore will concede that I shouldn't hold their feet to the fire on that. But it was a bit odd. We talked about it as probably, contracts that were, waiting to expire and all that sort of thing. And apparently that all happened because all 13 movies, all 10, 11, however you count it, TV series, nobody's counting anymore. There's just a lot of Star Trek.
It's just yeah.
It's all on there.
An open fire hose of Star Trek.
It's a cannon. It's a fire hose. We can't decide what it is, but it's Star Trek. So check that out if you're not already a Paramount Plus subscriber. That might entice you. I like having Paramount Plus, at least for all the Star Trek. It's nice. And I think you have one more similar tidbit.
Oh yeah, this caught my eye today. That several names from behind the camera of the Rick Berman era of Star Trek that will be familiar to fans are going to be working together on season 3 of Picard, which we won't see for a while since season 2 doesn't come until next year. But visual effects wizard Doug Drexler and graphic arts wizards Michael and Denise Okuda are going to be on the creative team putting Picard season 3 together. So That'll be nice. I guess we'll see some really cool new Okudograms for one thing.
Yes. Yeah, maybe so. That would be awesome. Star Trek needs some Okudograms. That's what we're missing right now.
That's what's been missing from the new era of Star Trek is the Elcar's Okudograms. Yeah.
There's a stunning lack of Okudograms in Star Trek, so we need to have that.
Which is not to say that's the only thing the Okudas contribute to Star Trek, of course, but that's like that's the quintessential thing, right?
Yeah.
All the attention to detail and the in jokes that are in there, and it's just such a labor of love. It's obvious. So
yeah, I love seeing. We talked last week about how it was great that it's not all the same people making Star Trek anymore, but it's great to have some people who really know Star Trek and are really great at it coming back and being a part of it again. That's exciting. All right, so I think it's time for us to talk about this week's episode of Star Trek Prodigy, Starstruck.
Another fun episode. Another great episode from Prodigy. As I was reviewing it for Red Shirts Always Die, I thought about Captain Kirk in The Guardian, in The City on the Edge of Forever, telling Edith Keeler that a novelist in the future would write a whole book about the words "let me help," and I thought this episode had that same theme from the other side. Instead of the 3 words being "let me help," the 3 words are "I need help."
Oh, right.
And when do we learn who to say that to, and how to say that, and who do we listen to? Those were some important questions that came up in the episode, but that makes it sound a lot more I don't know,
serious than it was,
schoolmarmish than it turned out to be. A fun episode, and it's a fairly simple plot. The protostar is caught in a gravity well and can't get out because Dal's making all the wrong decisions. But very exciting and exciting without being anxiety producing.
Right.
Just another big fun cosmic roller coaster of an episode.
It was. I mean, but not without something to say, and certainly without character development. I mean, this is kind of that first moment where we see the crew trying to get through something other than escaping the bad guy, and they've got a real Star Trek problem on their hands now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not that escaping the bad guy isn't a problem we have in Star Trek, but
but it's a real science of the universe against you.
Yes. It's aliens versus nature. That classic form of conflict we all learned about in English class.
That's right.
But it's cool to see how their interaction with hologram Janeway is beginning, and even though she kind of holds back and sticks to her programming or whatever, she's got an attitude.
I don't know. We don't know the story on hologram Janeway, how far past Voyager is this that she's become the template for emergency command hologram programs,
Right.
But she, clearly, I remember when the EMH first comes online in the series Voyager, he's of course nothing like what he is by the end of the series, or I should say he hasn't yet become all he will be by the end of the series.
Right.
But this hologram Janeway seems very much like the real Janeway. The humor, the warmth, the concern, the intelligence, even the holographic coffee mug. She's got her coffee mug when she comes back near the end of the episode. I loved that.
Yeah, that's
she says,
the thing.
Do you still need help? And takes the sip on the mug.
Yes, that's the moment. Hologram Janeway's sitting there sipping her coffee. Is just that's perfect. Yeah, it's great. And I love that. And what's really interesting too is we also see, Dal was kind of our hero in the first couple of episodes, rascal that he is and all that. But we really see his character flaws coming through in this episode in a big way.
Oh, no doubt.
and I got to tell you, I've got a friend and also my son who have both told me they really dislike Dal. They just do not like him. My son went a little bit further. He was particularly like, how am I supposed to relate to a purple guy who looks like a porcupine? But that's but
well, now that's an important Star Trek lesson: learning to relate to someone who's purple and looks like a porcupine.
Yeah.
So that'll come. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't dislike Dal, but I am ready to see more of Gwyn.
Mm.
I mean, they haven't played it in a disturbing way, but I am a little disturbed myself that she's still a prisoner on
Mm-hmm.
this ship, and so there's reconciliation that needs to happen there, and I think it will
Yeah.
soon, because we saw what I did like about this episode, especially, was the relationship between Gwyn and Rock that seems to be developing, where
Mm-hmm.
they're still on opposite sides of the fence, but Rock was taking food down to Gwyn, who's in the brig,
Yeah.
unasked to do that, just of her own initiative, and even while they were fighting. In that one sequence, in the middle of a shuttle being built around them, which, how cool is that? but they both had opportunities to speak honestly to each other about what they were feeling and thinking about the
Mm-hmm.
situation they'd left behind and the situation they were in now, and I appreciated that, and I hope the series is planting seeds for a very complicated and rich friendship, or some, maybe it won't be. Maybe they'll surprise me, but it'll be some kind of interesting dynamic between those two characters.
Yeah.
I suspect.
Well, Rock Talk is just is so open and so warm and caring,
Yeah.
She just doesn't hold back, and she just is just so kind, and she sees people and she automatically just, her first, it's like her go-to is compassion. And that's really cool to see. And we see that Gwyn has that in her too, when the little Cation girl comes up in the first episode.
Yeah.
And I agree, the fact that she is in the brig is unsettling, but it should be, and it's also an outgrowth of Dal's sort of arrogance and vindictiveness. I think he's kind of wanting to get back at her, and also his lack of trust. And that actually is sort of an underlying theme in this episode, the distrust that Dal has of not just Gwyn, but of a lot of things. This is the interesting thing, the sort of kickoff for this series of sort of describing what Star Trek is, describing what Federation values are, introducing us to the concept of the Federation, all of that. And I gotta say, the scene where Janeway, we talked last week about this series as a way to introduce kids to Star Trek. And we related that to introducing kids to our faith. But there is that sense in the way people talk about this series and the way we think about this series. It does feel like it's Star Trek evangelism. And I have to say that scene, and I have to say that scene was the most evangelistic. Like, coming from a background of Christian subculture, evangelical subculture stuff, that felt straight out of a Christian show for me. That was to me like, it was the one time I just felt like, gosh, this feels like a Christian show, because it was very much like, here's this, idea that, we want to communicate with our show, and we're just going to lay it out there very specifically. Right. And even down to having one of the characters being like, it was Jenkum Pog, who was like, this Federation stuff is actually pretty cool, whatever.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of the line in Liar Liar where Jim Carrey's character says, "Hey, this truth stuff is pretty cool." It just kind of feels a little bit, I don't know, feels a little bit didactic.
So you thought that scene didn't
It wasn't bad.
Didn't give you the Star Trek feels. It gave you a kind of a didactic feel.
It gave me it was very nice. It was very good. It wasn't that heavy-handed and awful like I'm making it out to be.
I really felt Janeway was just kind of laying it out there.
She was
straightforwardly and matter-of-factly, and
she absolutely was. And there's nothing
kind of the same
wrong
way
with
that Picard does for Lily in First Contact.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I did feel like, particularly Jenkum was a little bit too quickly receptive of everything, but we have shorter episodes, so we move through stuff like that. But it just kind of hit those buttons a little bit, and it was a little bit of nostalgia, but it wasn't a bad thing at all. It was cool actually to see how Janeway explained everything and how she laid it out to them, and to imagine myself in the seat of a person who doesn't know Star Trek, and having this explained to them for the first time, just as the characters on the screen are having it explained to them. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I liked that scene a lot.
I didn't dislike it. I don't mean to be disparaging of it at all.
No, it's okay. I mean, you reacted to it the way you reacted to it.
I liked it. It was just funny how it reminded me of an evangelistic Christian show.
That's interesting. Because it didn't push those buttons for me, but I can see where it might for someone else. And but I liked the use of the visuals in that scene where we've got the various founding species of the Federation represented, and that Vulcan sure looked like Spock. I don't know if it was, but it sure looked like him. And I thought that was cool. And one thing I thought that was interesting, though, was that Dow's not altogether wrong when he tells the other members of the crew, the other cadets, quote unquote, that if it sounds too good to be true, it is. I mean, that's not always true in life, but it's often true. And he talks about the Federation being just another name for somebody else in charge. Yeah. So, even though he can't see the irony and the fact that he's lied to these people and will lie to them again. Yeah, but I'm lying for us,
Right.
But still, even though he can't see the irony then of calling out somebody else, what he sees as somebody else's lies, there is some healthy skepticism he has there, I think, and we don't know why. We don't know what his backstory is yet, really. He doesn't know even fully, I think, what his backstory is. First episode, he wanted to know what species he was, right?
Right.
But I think ultimately my prediction is that's going to serve him well as he grows into a lead, as he grows into being the captain, or maybe co-captain. I don't know. Maybe they're all going to be maybe it's going to be a captainless crew in a good sense. Maybe it's going to be really more of a group effort than any other, not than any other crew we've seen. They're all, especially Discovery's, hitting this theme of togetherness and teamwork.
Right.
But maybe we're going to see a starship that doesn't have that hierarchy, because they're not Starfleet.
Right.
So while obviously you need to have people with clearly defined responsibilities, maybe it's going to be more of a common effort than we've seen sometimes before. I don't know. But should Dow become the captain, grow into that role, I think that healthy skepticism might be a good trait, because we need that in life sometimes.
Well, agreed, and I think there is, as you say, I appreciate that you describe his skepticism as healthy, because there is a healthy quality to skepticism, one that I think Christians don't embrace as often as they should, especially when people are coming to us, claiming to represent a Christian worldview or something like that. But it's interesting, that he says, the Federation is just a name for somebody else in charge. And, that kind of hinges on the idea that maybe he thinks that, himself being in charge, or being in charge of himself is a value, right? Is something of importance, that in itself is a good. And I think Janeway shows that that's not the case, because he clearly doesn't know what he needs to know to be in charge. He has the attitude. Well, he doesn't have the attitude. He has the confidence. We'll give him that. He has the confidence to be in charge. That's about all he has. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the same thing that drove all his escape attempts from the prison colony.
Right. I mean, it served him well up to a certain point, but he's had nobody to look out for but himself, up to now. You think back to the previous episode where he sort of last minute draws rock talk onto the rocket, like we
Yeah,
could escape.
right.
But the only reason he wants us to escape is so he can escape, right?
Right.
Very self-focused.
Yeah, oh yeah, he says at one point, "This is my ship. I control it." And then they say, "Your ship." Oh, I said "R," didn't I?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So there's definitely a lot of ego in him, which of course is born from isolation and having to fend for himself. And I mean, you can understand where it comes from. You can also understand why it's not a very likable quality to a lot of people who are watching the show right now.
Sure. But I have some sympathy for him.
Right.
I think he's going to grow out of it sooner or later.
Well, and as I talked about last episode, Brett, who plays Dal, said that when he was asked, to briefly summarize what Prodigy was about to him, first word out of his mouth was growth. And I think it makes sense that comes from him seeing even more of where his character is at the beginning of this series. It's obvious that Dal has a lot of growth to do. And just the same way I can't look at an early episode of a Star Trek series, and say, oh man, that was so terrible, because I know that what doesn't quite work about it is just a function of the series needing to find its legs like most series do. Mm-hmm. Right? Also, I can't look at Dal and say, oh, well, he's just a jerk, because I know that he can grow. And that's what's interesting, what Janeway says. We talked last week about potential. Mm-hmm. That's what Janeway says, he's like, this crew has potential, like you really have the potential to be a good crew. I don't remember exactly how she says it, and I think that's true of them.
Yeah, I think so too. And I listened back to our episode, and I'll have to retract my statement about not seeing them as prodigies, because I remembered after we recorded that Jane Campog has some pretty impressive engineering talents, and Zero's got the whole Medusan telepathy thing going for Zero. Mm-hmm. And so as I listened to our discussion, I thought, oh, I wish I'd thought of these things, while talking to Kevin, because I think you picked up on that in a way that I was, for whatever reason, not able to. But yeah, they all do have gifts and skills, and I guess under Hollow Janeway's tutelage, they will begin to develop those. Now, if by episode 20 of season 1, Dal is still just kind of a jerk, then the series will have a flaw we really need to talk about. But
agreed. But that would.
And I am concerned again. Even in this conversation, we're spending so much time on him, and I think Gwyn's this fascinating character that we're not. And we can't say much more about her at this point, you and I, because I don't feel we've been given enough. Maybe other viewers feel differently, and I'd like to have those conversations, because I think that's got to be. I mean, she's the daughter of this tyrannical overlord, and she gives the just following orders defense to Rock, but she's clearly very grieved about it. I was told you were nothing but unwanted. I was told you were worthless. I don't remember her exact line at this point.
That's right.
Her, and clearly she has enough innate compassion and empathy, like with that Cation we talked about, who now is laboring away in the mines. Oh, I feel so bad for that kitty cat. We got to get her on the ship by the end of the first season somehow, when they go back and rescue all the prisoners, whatever. But so clearly she feels tension there, but he is still her father, and isn't. I mean, how true to life is this, where we have these complicated and conflicted family relationships where we know something's not right, but we don't know what to do about it, and we don't know who's in the wrong, or if anybody's entirely in the wrong, or And clearly, I'm not saying that. Clearly, there are some situations where people are in the right and in the wrong. There's abuse and neglect and other things. But also there are just families where things are just off and weird, and nobody can. And family dynamics are tricky, and I'm no expert in them. So I feel like with Gwyn, we've got this massive potential character to explore, and we haven't done it in 3 episodes really, and I'm frustrated a little by that. That it so far is mainly another boy's coming of age story, and I hope quickly we expand our focus.
I expect so. I think we have far too much invested, particularly in Gwyn. I mean, there's a reason you're interested in her. There's a reason all of us are interested in her, because we've been given a lot of details about her, and we've kind of seen behind her mask a little bit, and we've seen her.
That's a good way of putting it.
Adjusting to as you've said, this shift from what she's been taught to believe to what she's learning.
Yeah,
and I think we can all relate to that. And so, and particularly, I think we can learn from that too. Again, from a Christian perspective, I think in certain Christian traditions, we're taught a lot of things about others, and they're not always Christian things that we're learning about others. They're not always Christ-like things that we're learning about others.
Yeah,
and a lot of them are based on, bigotry or mythology or whatever, assumptions, political machinations, whatever. And I just think whenever you have that sense that, those people over there are somehow outside the circle of this, the tent of God's love, that you're being misled.
Yeah.
In one way or another, you're being misled, and you might be misled by people who genuinely believe what they're telling you. That's the thing that makes it really difficult. When Gwyn believes that these people are what they're called, that they are unwanted, that there's something about them that makes them less valuable, or that they're criminals in some way, and even just the fact that we think that somebody who's committed a crime is sort of worthy of dehumanization is a problem. Even just that word criminal, defining somebody by their mistakes. So the fact that she believes all those things, I think, gives us also a good picture of how some people who we love, who we know to be compassionate people, get caught up in things that cause them to behave in ways that are not compassionate. And I think rather than writing those people off, we might ask ourselves in what ways we have lacked compassion in our own lives, particularly at times when we believed we were in the right. And so I think Gwyn's journey is going to be really interesting in that regard. And she does speak, I think, a piece of what we're going to be talking about in our main topic today, about the unwanted. Because I agree with you that there's a certain amount that she hasn't been revealed to us, but I think we've got a lot going on with her. We've got, I think, as much going on for us with her as we have with Dal. Dal is louder, and he's more brash, and he's the person whose focus we started with. But I think Gwyn has been developed at least as much as Dal by this point. She might not have been involved in quite as much of the action as him, but I think we've learned a lot about her character in 3 episodes. So,
it's a good point, and I think it's coming. I'm not
right,
despairing yet. I'm just that's just where I am at the moment. So
well, it's you meet a character and they're enticing and they're exciting. And you just want to know more, and the story just can't move fast enough for you. Yeah,
right. Exactly.
I definitely know that feeling. I feel that way about all of them. I can't wait to learn more about everybody. I enjoy all the characters. I'm particularly intrigued by Murph. Friend of mine has a hypothesis about Murph, and I am so hoping it's true, but I'm not going to say what I'm not going to say.
Apparently there's quite the guessing game going on Twitter of how Murph is connected to Star Trek, because apparently Murph is to previous Star Trek. I mean,
right.
Aside from just by being part of Star Trek Prodigy, but
right. So I'm excited. I had my own idea, but then I heard their idea, and I was like, oh, that would be so much cooler in a certain sense, just because it fits so nicely and it's so obscure, and I'm like, oh man. But anyway, we'll see what happens. It was a good episode. It was one of those episodes that oh hey, the protostar is caught in the opening title sequence of Star Trek Lower Decks. Oh my gosh. Those 5 seconds from Lower Decks opening titles are our entire episode.
Maybe next week the protostar will knock off the top of a rock formation in the first few seconds.
There you go. By
mid-season,
really
be having the meta.
Yeah, by mid-season we'll have a giant alien, clamped onto one of the nacelles. It's all going to happen.
Only they'll play it for drama, not for laughs.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Oh boy. Well, what interested me in this episode, we talked about it a little bit with Gwyn, we've talked about it a little bit with Dal, and you and I came up with this idea of calling the episode "The Wanted Unwanted" because they do refer to these people as the unwanted. And by the way, if you skip to this part of the show, just in case we're talking about something other than new Star Trek and you're not really interested in the new Star Trek segment, stick with us because we're not just talking about new Star Trek. But that's our leaping off point here. But we do talk about the unwanted, and we talk about how they're perceived, particularly by Gwyn. And then we can also look at how they perceive themselves, or how an exemplar of that group perceives himself in Dal. And Dal being so clearly scarred, clearly having had a lot of people he didn't want to be over him, in authority over him, telling him what to do, and putting him in situations like being in the mine. And having that sense that he has to fight for himself and not belonging anywhere because he doesn't even know his own species. And, I just think of that as being so indicative of the way I related to Dal a lot in this episode. When Dal was saying the Federation is just another way to say people telling him what to do or whatever it is. And being so distrustful and saying, don't believe everything they tell you. Mm-hmm. I come from a background over the course of the past 20 years of my life and faith. I have been struggling with a great distrust of institutions, particularly institutions of faith, because I had come to a point where, while I had gleaned so much good from them growing up, I was seeing all of this stuff sort of fall apart and fail to be effective. And I felt like sort of the postmodern transition was not being well addressed, and that a lot of people in culture were falling by the wayside. And I was involved in a church for a while that was really for people who were falling between the cracks. Mm-hmm. And I found myself falling between those cracks, at that same time. And so So I really gravitate toward that. And I have had in my life, anger and distrust and uncertainty, and where I just didn't even want to walk into a church building, didn't want to walk into a church service. And when I did, it was because friends were involved in it, and I felt a little bit comfortable, but I still didn't know what to do with myself, and felt out of place, and really had that trouble with trusting. And I've even had experiences where I place my trust into, a church group, and then have that, and then find that I get damaged, get hurt yet again. Something goes awry yet again. And so I can really relate to Dal, and I can really relate to a lot of people in our world right now who do feel like they're among the unwanted, whether it's for the reasons that I feel like an outsider in a lot of places, in a lot of circumstances, or other reasons. And I think we're hearing a lot from voices of outsiders right now in our current cultural conversation, to use an alliterative phrase. I think we're hearing a lot from outsiders and people who have been marginalized and set aside, and people who feel used and abused. And we've talked on the show about, the cracks starting to show in a lot of the institutions that we trust. So I can understand where Dal is right now. And it's interesting to understand that when he's talking about an institution that we all have such trust in as Trekkies, the Federation, even though we've seen some flaws there. So I just thought it was interesting to look at that idea of the unwanted, or of feeling unwanted, feeling like you can't belong or you don't belong because of this thing that makes you unique, because of that thing that makes you weird, because of this thing or the other thing that has caused people to tell you that you aren't wanted. Yeah. That you don't belong here, that you are outside that tent.
Well, I so appreciate you voicing all that. I think it's a gift to those of us like me who have been comfortable in church institutions our whole
Hmm.
life. I mean, I'm an ordained minister in one of those institutions.
Right.
And, though I'm not currently pastoring, that's not because anything bad happened. I simply felt drawn to another form of ministry. But
Hmm.
if, if churches, if those on the quote unquote inside would listen to those on the quote unquote outside more, you know, we might avoid some of that pain, and we might we meaning the institutions might not make the mistakes that lead people to feel like they don't belong.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, one of our confessions of faith in my denomination talks about the Holy Spirit empowering us to, among other things, listen to voices long silenced.
Mm.
And those are great words, but we don't always live up to them. I mean, no
Right. Of
church
course.
does perfectly. But so I just want to thank you for sharing all that, because that's something that the churches need to hear. So I think that's a very valuable gift you're giving when you give voice to those feelings of alienation and exclusion. So
Well, thank
certainly
you.
there have been times in my
Gosh.
life when I felt that way, but it hasn't generally been in religious settings. I've been fortunate, I suppose, to
Hmm.
feel comfortable in those. But being too comfortable can lead to its own set of problems, because then you
Yeah.
can become part of the problem without even knowing it.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I think I did some of that myself. And it was very jarring. I like to say, I talk about the evangelical tradition that I came from and everything, and I have no particular ill will for it. Generally, just because I mean I do describe myself as post evangelical, but that's because I don't fit there anymore,
Hmm.
and I have a lot of problems with not only where that was when I left, but where it's gone since I left.
Mm.
It's a very uncomfortable place for me, even as it's incredibly comfortable in so many ways. If we don't venture into certain subjects, if I don't see certain things happening, it's fine, it's comfortable, it's cozy because it's where I came from. But then, the conversations get a little longer, and I go, oh dear, I really don't belong here, and and so I've come from that tradition, and I know a lot of people who've been very, very damaged by not just mine but others, and of all different stripes. I know of people who've been damaged by their church traditions that they grew up in. It's not an uncommon story, sadly. And I would say that I came through relatively unscathed. I actually had a lot better time of it than a lot of my peers.
Hmm.
But it was when I started to grow up and started to learn about philosophy and theology, and learn about postmodern thought, and learn about my culture, and the environment in which I was living, and started to have want more challenge, and I moved up in the age ranks,
Uh-huh.
of Sunday school or whatever. I expected things to get more complex and more
Mm.
interesting, and they didn't. And in fact, in a lot of ways, they kind of got even more surface.
Hmm.
And I felt like the church model that I was living in wasn't growing with me.
Hmm.
And that was when I started having to figure out to leave, to find a different church model, to try to create a different church model, and then to have that crash and burn.
Mm.
And so it's been an interesting journey. But I know that I'm hardly alone, in people who have, the more they've learned and the more they've grown. It's kind of like Gwyn, you know, feeling like she knows certain things and can trust certain ideas, and then starts to find out that what she was told doesn't match with the reality that
Hmm.
exists beyond the confines, of her warm little bubble. And that's what a lot of us have encountered. But what's great for me being friends with you and being on the show with you, is that, you remind me of the good things in various church traditions. And I've learned a lot more of that. And I'm much more comfortable with that now than I used to be. And I'm starting to recognize that brokenness that I found that pushed me away, and those limitations that I found that pushed me away, they don't, first of all, the specific ones that I ran into don't exist everywhere. Mm-hmm. Second of all, that if I keep searching, as Jesus says, seek and you'll find. You will find, not right away, not miraculously, necessarily, although sometimes that does happen, but you will find. Just keep seeking, keep searching, keep asking, keep knocking, and waiting for those doors to be opened, and waiting for things to be revealed. So I do eventually find some things that I can be comfortable with and that do encourage me. But what's been great is that as I've not relied on church structures as much, I don't feel as dependent upon them. So that if something goes awry in a church structure, it doesn't wreck me anymore quite as badly. Mm-hmm. It's something that I know might happen because all of our systems are broken. All of us are broken. Mm-hmm. None of us are perfect. Even the Federation is imperfect. Even Starfleet is imperfect. We've seen it time and time again in Star Trek. Mm-hmm. And if Dal runs into the right things, he's going to feel that he has had his fears about Starfleet and about the Federation confirmed, and he's going to just run even harder away. So yeah, I think, my story is my story, and it's different from other people's, but at the very least I can say that I relate to somebody who doesn't trust structures, and particularly doesn't trust churches. And I know we have a lot of listeners who are in that position or have been in that position in their lives. And, I do want to say, number one, that there is hope. Not just necessarily that you will find a church structure, that will be healthy for you. You might not for a long time. That's a result of where you live and who you can connect with and what you can find and what your issues are and what your needs are. But just, keep searching, not just for a quote unquote church, but for a community of people who will explore faith along with you. Find that. That's the important thing. And you can find that through friendships, through family. You can find that in a lot of different spaces online. You can find that in a lot of different spaces in person. You can find it at a coffee shop. So be open and be looking for that in all of your life, not just in churches, because that running on that hamster wheel can get a little discouraging.
The Spirit moves where the Spirit wills.
The Spirit moves where this, yes.
And while I certainly have experienced the Spirit in churches, I've experienced it elsewhere too. And I think what you're talking about is grace, essentially. That even in unexpected ways and in unexpected places, you can experience a sense of being wanted. Prodigy is about these characters who've been called and treated as unwanted, but there are no unwanted to God. As we were talking about this episode we were going to record tonight, I thought about a sermon that was preached by Paul Tillich. He was a very important theologian of the last century, German Protestant theologian. And his approach was to try to relate the issues and concerns of theology to everyday concerns of life, starting with the everyday concerns. Some theologians started with scripture and doctrine. He started with the existential concerns people were feeling. Yeah. And one of them was this feeling of being unwanted, unaccepted, not fitting in. And his most famous sermon is a sermon called "You Are Accepted." And I'm going to read just a part of it that I think is relevant to our discussion here. He's talking about when grace strikes us. Grace strikes us when we are in great pain and restlessness. It strikes us when we walk through the dark valley of a meaningless and empty life. It strikes us when we feel that our separation is deeper than usual because we have violated another life, a life which we loved, or from which we are estranged. It strikes us when our disgust for our own being, Our indifference, our weakness, our hostility, and our lack of direction and composure have become intolerable to us. It strikes us when year after year the longed-for perfection of life does not appear, when the old compulsions reign within us as they have for decades, when despair destroys all joy and courage. Sometimes, at that moment, a wave of light breaks into our darkness, and it is as though a voice were saying, "You are accepted. You are accepted. Accepted by that which is greater than you, and the name of which you do not know. Do not ask for the name now. Perhaps you will find it later. Do not try to do anything now. Perhaps later you will do much. Do not seek for anything. Do not perform anything. Do not intend anything. Simply accept the fact that you are accepted. If that happens to us, we experience grace. After such an experience, we may not be better than before, and we may not believe more than before, but everything is transformed. In that moment, grace conquers sin, and reconciliation bridges the gulf of estrangement, and nothing is demanded of this experience, no religious or moral or intellectual presupposition, nothing but acceptance. Yeah. I think that's a powerful statement of what grace is, and just, and sometimes people will criticize it. Yeah, but what about? And then they go right back to the doctrine and the presuppositions he's trying to say in the moment. All of that has its place, but you have to begin with the experience of acceptance and accepting that you are accepted. Believing and not in just a head sense, but acknowledging that you are wanted.
Mm-hmm. And that is a hard thing for many of us to believe.
Yeah.
And that's so beautiful, and I'm so glad you brought that to the show, because when we were talking about this beforehand, that just turned to the key for me, because that's exactly what I'm seeing when I'm looking at this episode of Prodigy. I'm seeing someone who cannot accept that they're accepted. It's very difficult for us to accept that when we haven't felt accepted in our lives by family, by society, and particularly also, I think, by churches and religious structures, maybe even by employers, different things like that. There are all sorts of ways in which we can feel that we're not accepted, and somehow that can be a very strong, almost seemingly indomitable narrative in our lives. And I have known so many people, and I have been there myself, who simply feel that there is no space for them. Mm-hmm. And there is no place for them. And it's all because there are human beings who, as I mentioned earlier, have gotten themselves to believe that there is a group of people to whom they can say no when they're asked, whether they deserve love, whether they deserve acceptance, that there's a group of people that they can exclude. I've said it on the show before, and I'll say it again. And these are not my words originally, but whenever you draw a line between yourself and someone else, Jesus is always on the other side of the line. And, it's not us that decides who's in and who's out. That tent stretches as far as it goes because it's not our tent, it's God's tent. Mm-hmm. And it covers whom it will cover. Mm-hmm. And God is not willing that any should perish. And so I really, really believe what Tillich is saying there. And I think it's really honestly a core tenet of our show, that you are accepted, that you matter exactly as you are, and that you're worthy of love exactly as you are, not because of anything you've done that makes you worthy, but because you need it so badly. And anybody who needs love as badly as we all do can't be turned away from love, I think, when they come to face it. And anything that turns you away is not love. And it comes also to the difference. You mentioned grace, and Tillich is talking great deal about grace there. Grace is a word we toss around in Christian circles a lot. I want to just kind of give a little bit of an unpacking of it real quickly. And I do that in conversation with the word mercy. There's a song by the Newsboys, okay? Some of you might know that.
We're going back a ways.
From Christian culture, yeah. This is from the 90s.
Yeah.
It's a song. It's called Real Good Thing. And the chorus says, when we don't get what we deserve, that's a real good thing. When we get what we don't deserve, that's a real good thing. And I had to puzzle over that when I first listened to that song. What in the world are they talking about? And I don't know if it was explained to me or if I figured it out. It was probably explained to me. That they're talking about mercy and grace. So that mercy is when we don't get what we deserve, or perhaps what we feel we deserve, right? Something that might be due us, like I've done these wrong things, and so I want to punish myself for it. And God's mercy, or mercy that we might have on one another, is when we choose not to hold that against someone. When we choose to not give them consequences for their wrongdoing, but to give them a chance, right? So we don't get what we deserve. We don't get ultimate spiritual death and destruction, that's mercy. Grace is when we get what we don't deserve. And it's interesting, when I was thinking about this topic completely separately from Star Trek earlier this week, I was thinking about this. The one thing that I thought about that is easy to point to that we get as grace. I mean, we talk about all these things like, going to heaven or having a crown of stars or whatever kind of metaphors we want to use. None of that is very relatable. But I think one thing that is acceptance.
Yeah.
I think it's when the prodigal son returns and, the father taking him back as one of his workers or slaves, it would be mercy, right? But the father takes the prodigal son back as his son, and that's grace, right? Because that's celebrating the son. That's giving the son a home and acceptance and a place to belong. That's grace. That's when we get what we don't deserve. Not that we don't deserve it because we're bad, awful, horrible things that don't deserve anything, but it's that what we can't earn, right? Because it's not about merit. Love doesn't function on that metric. It's just about love. It's just about the fact that you are a human being created in the image of God, and you're not unwanted. You may be unwanted by every person you can name in your immediate circle, but you're not unwanted by God. And I guarantee you're not unwanted by every person. Not only is God there in this grand cosmic way loving you, but you can find God's love in the acceptance and love of other people. It does exist. It is there. And it starts, the ability to find that starts, as Tillich rightly, very correctly points out, with the acceptance that you are accepted. That's a big hurdle to have to get over because it's an act of faith. But it's a first step, and it's an important one. And I think we do see this principle throughout Star Trek. And that's one of the reasons Star Trek is a narrative to which I'm consistently drawn, or narrative universe to which I'm consistently drawn, and why, a podcast like this exists. There are so many people. I mean, from Barclay to Data to, any number of people.
Well, Spock, for Pete's
sake.
Spock,
for goodness sakes, you're right.
His own father didn't want him. If you take Star Trek V at face value, his first reaction to the sight of his son was so human.
Right.
I mean, that's harsh.
Yeah. We don't know if that was Sarek's actual reaction or if that's how Spock imagines it because of how he feels about what his father thinks of him. That is one way or another, it's a window into Spock's world. He's isolated as a Vulcan because he's too human for the Vulcans. And he's isolated as in the human world because he's too Vulcan for the humans.
Mm-hmm.
Surfing aboard a starship is really the only place where he can find acceptance because the starship is engaged in the unknown. It's engaged in those in between weird, undiscovered, as yet undiscovered places and peoples. And that's where he can really fit and thrive. And I think so many people are like, like either too humanistic for the Christians, too Christian for the humanists, whatever it is, I find that, I've found that myself, trying to find places to fit in a career, I'm too Christian for these people, not the right kind of Christian for these people, not Christian enough for these people,
Yeah.
It's always, there are always ways in which we can feel othered and feel outcast. But if you feel that way, just know that that's not the whole of your world. Being not accepted here or there or anywhere you've been doesn't mean that there's no acceptance for you. And you might not, as Tillich says, you might not know the name of the acceptance. You might be agnostic, But if you can just know and understand that there really is acceptance out there for you, that's the first step toward finding it. Okay, so I hope that this episode has been helpful to some people. It's certainly a meaningful episode for me. But I think it's time that we look into an audience question.
Yes, let's. Okay, so our question this week is an interesting one. Could a being like Q or like the prophets or other such seemingly godlike beings exist in the real universe, that is, a universe where God is sovereign? So this is a thought experiment in how well Christian theology could accommodate discoveries that might be made and that are being made in the Star Trek universe. I don't have too much problem imagining that we could discover such beings in the real universe that we really believe as Christians God is sovereign over. Starfleet treats the prophets as wormhole aliens to bring them into a frame of reference that we can understand, theists or not, I think. And Q, I think Q certainly seems omniscient and omnipotent and all those attributes of God, and certainly claims them for himself and for the continuum. But I kind of just take it on faith that whatever powers there are in this universe, God is greater than all of them.
Well, I would tend to agree with certainly the last part of your statement there. I think if we did find something like the Q existing, for real in our actual universe, then, there are two ways to react to that. One is, there are three ways. One, this is God. Two, this being exists, therefore God cannot. And this being exists and is not a God, or is not God, therefore God cannot exist. Or three, and I think this is what you're driving at, which I think is pretty intriguing. If this being exists and is not God, God therefore must be greater than whatever this being exhibits as its power.
Yes, that would be my option.
Which, I tend to agree because, if you really believe that God is sovereign over the universe, then, things like that, anything like that would be under God's sovereignty. Just by default, they have to be. You don't have to understand how, but,
Right.
You would,
I don't know why God would see fit to have beings like Q in God's universe, but
right, right, and
but I'm not God.
Right. Well, exactly. I don't know why God sees fit to have mosquitoes on our planet, but I'm not God.
Right.
But it's a statement of faith, I think, to say that God must therefore be sovereign over this, and it's like anything else that we see in our world or in our universe that might perplex us in any way, whether that's, a godlike being or a tragedy, we still have to say that God is sovereign over that as a statement of faith if we're going to have that faith, right? but then I think we look for some confirmation of that, because I think it exists, I think we find ways in which, God, God is sovereign, and understanding, you think of that song, He's got the whole world in His hands, and you think of all the terrible things that happen in our world, but we're still in God's hands, and that's not just a comforting thought, but it's a very salvific reality. And so in that sense, that makes our sufferings, it doesn't make our sufferings any smaller, right? It doesn't make them any difficult to go through, but it does mean that we're held in a hand that won't let us fall. Ultimately, all will be redeemed and all will be rescued, because God gets what God wants. And so it'd be the same thing. We could see something like this, this Q being or the prophets, whatever it may be. Jake and Ben have that conversation early in Deep Space Nine about, well, the teacher says they're just wormhole aliens, but the Bajorans say they're prophets, and Ben says, look, they seem to exist outside of time and know what's going to happen, and before it happens, I think prophets is a fair term. Of course, prophets don't exist outside of time. They aren't divine beings. they're people,
right?
With great God-given perceptive powers or perceptive abilities to see and to name what's true in their world. Not necessarily to predict the future, although some prophecies seem to or did or do predict the future. That's not the only thing they do. But the point being that if these beings exist, Ben Sisko's saying, well, they are prophets. I don't see any other way to evaluate them. Even if they're aliens, they're obviously aliens that are far beyond us. And if we encountered that, even if they're deified by another species, we still have to recognize that there must even still be a greater authority, a greater power. So that no matter how vast the universe is, God is ever more vast. No matter how deep and incalculable the universe is, God is ever more deep and incalculable. And no matter how horrible tragedies may be, God is ever more salvific.
It's interesting you take it in that direction, because it's one thing, I think, this is kind of like late night college dorm theology question when you're talking about what if we found Q really existed? Right. But then when you're getting into why is this terrible thing happen, that's a very different, very pressing, very urgent, very painful question, right? And so I wouldn't answer with quite the same.
Well, it's just the
flippancy is not the word, but I was very ready with my answer, and of course, I guess the pushback on that is, well, what would it take for you to? What could disprove your belief in God? And at this point, I'd have to say, well, I guess nothing. If I really do believe God is sovereign over everything, but also I think looking at the question of God as a Christian, if we want to know God, we look first. Or maybe not first always, but we look ultimately at some point to Jesus as the criterion, the living criterion of who and what God is like. And so turns out God is not at all like Q, messing around for the fun of things and causing bad things to happen just for the heck of it, clicking the divine fingers just for kicks, that God is not like Q. And God, I think I've said on the podcast before, God chooses to be God for us, and that means God chooses in the person of Jesus Christ to limit God's self for us and to suffer with us and in our place and alongside us. So I think finding near omniscient, omnipotent beings doesn't threaten my faith in God, because
God's so much more than that, right?
God is more than that, and God, God is fundamentally for us. I mean, I think that's a bedrock assertion of Christian faith, and Q has lots of omni attributes, but he's not for us.
Right.
The prophets, I guess, are for Bajor, and so I don't presume to pass judgment on their faith, but I would say for myself, God is sovereign over even the wormhole aliens and the prophets. Yeah. I don't know, but I get that it is, as you said, it's a faith statement. It can't be proven or disproven, but I choose to believe God would be sovereign over any amazing discovery of powerful beings, or even, and is certainly sovereign over even the worst tragedy, not causing them to happen, but bringing good out of them in some way that we can't even sometimes see.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just kind of follow the rubric of like, the universe shows clear elements of design, therefore there must be a designer. The designer must be greater than that which is designed. The universe is vast, therefore God must be ever more vast. So whatever we find within the universe, no matter how amazing it is, God must be greater. And the evidence that God exists, to me, is the existence of existence. That's well, the answer to the great philosophical question: why is there something rather than nothing?
Right.
That's to me, that's the core for me. And also, just to kind of turn the question around a little bit, I don't expect to ever find a Q or wormhole aliens or the Organians or anything like that in our universe, unless there was some way that they could operate according to the laws of physics. Because I really believe that God created a universe that functions on physical laws. And so I expect things that we discover within our universe to function within the physical laws of the universe. In Star Trek, the conceit is kind of, well, they seem to function outside of the physical laws of the universe, but they're transcendent in some way, and they're limited in some way, and they're operating somehow within the confines of the universe. We just have to take that on faith, But I would say probably such things don't actually exist in our universe in the first place.
Probably not, but it would be kind of cool.
It would be kind of cool.
And what I think is kind of freeing about where I come down on this is, because God is sovereign over everything, we can go out and investigate everything and not feel threatened like we're going to somehow cross into God's secrets or something, that
absolutely
it's all here for us to explore if we choose to, and nothing's off limits in that regard. Now, there are some things we shouldn't do with what we discover, I think, but knowing reality as fully as we can, I think, there's nothing ungodly about that, and we don't have to be threatened by what we discover. We may not understand it, and may not, the church and Christian tradition have gone through this many times, right? How has this new scientific thing we've learned? You mean the Earth is not the center of the galaxy? Well, how does that, But we come to terms with it, and we, and our faith persists, and God exists, and
right. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, there are certainly ethical limits to what we should do, but there are no limits to what we can learn.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right. So
yeah.
Anyway, fascinating question. Interesting topic for discussion. I'm sure we could take it further, but I think that'll do for now. So thanks for sending it in, and please send us more. We want them. We need them. We love them. Shower us with the affection of your questions. Make it rain questions.
Make it rain questions.
So while we're waiting for the skies to open and for the precipitation of preponderance to drench us with new discoveries, what can we expect to come up next week, Mike?
Next week, among other things, we'll be talking about the 4th episode of Star Trek Prodigy's first season, Dreamcatcher. I like that title. I'm excited.
That's another title. That's the 3rd title in a row that I really liked from Prodigy. So I think it's going to be a good title show. That's at least. That's good. Well, I'm looking forward to it, and hope you are too. And in the meantime, please like, share, rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you can do that. Also, again, send us your questions. We would love for them to rain down upon us. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and the Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your question on the show.
And you can support the show by using the support button on anchor.fm/GATST or by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/Gospel Trek Podcast. You can support the show, help us make good content, and get some cool perks as well.
And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time,
I'm Mike Poteet.
And I'm Kevin C. Neese. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.